Thank you, Keith. And as a matter of fact, it is snowing. I barely made it out yesterday. I was the last flight that wasn't canceled. But thank you very much. And I've got a lot of slides. We're going to go really fast paced, so fasten your seatbelts. For those of you who hadn't had coffee, I wanted a good morning wake up. But we go to the next slide. I know we were banned about talking about this. I just want to acknowledge that this is a difficult time. However, I think this is also, more importantly, the shift from one era to another. And so thus, when we shift from something that's older to something that is new, it brings opportunity. And I'm here today to give you a pitch on how green is that opportunity, and it is the new era that is going to rebirth or regenerate the automotive industry. So first, a little bit about me. You know, I live in the mountains of Colorado, work in a nonprofit, but I am an auto guy. I'm actually the fourth generation in the auto industry. My great-grandfather founded auto dealerships. He started selling scrap parts. It grew to a big chain, acquired by Sonic Automotive. He sold Lincoln Mercuries. That's my grandfather in the middle, looking at a Jaguar. In the 90s, I worked at Rocky Mountain Institute and helped start one of the first really new electric car startups, Hypercar. Has anybody heard of Hypercar? Wow, there's 5 of you. That's amazing. But what we did is literally looked at a series hybrid lightweight automobile. We actually tried to launch this at a time when gasoline was $1.15 a gallon, and we were in the last recession and tech bust. But this company still survives as FiberForge. Today, I lead RMI's MOVE practice, mobility and vehicle efficiency. You can check our website at move.rmi.org. And our mission is simple, because we are a nonprofit. We want to move the transport sector off of oil. So we work mostly in automotive, but we also work in heavy trucking and freight, and in the future, aviation. You have to ask a car guy, like, what do you drive? Well, this is my car. This was actually in SEMA. It might be a little bit different than what we're talking about today. I would say, though, this is probably Todd Palin's dream machine. So let me go and start and say that what we are about today in this Automotive News Green Conference is talking about a transformational shift that we are at the cusp of in this industry. And what I want to talk about are what I think are 4 transformational shifts we've seen in the U.S. industry. Now, you guys are car experts. We could argue there are a lot of shifts. There might be 10. There could be different ones than what I talked about. But here are the ones that I see and how they relate to where we are today. So the first one is the first speaker mentioned, the first big wave of innovation, the Model T, right? Mass production, Taylorism, a shift to steel. Van Diem steel was the actual trigger that created the mass production of this vehicle. This industry ended up scaling. Again, the boom in the 1920s and 30s. Sloan came in with GM, modified the model, and really grew the birth of what is the automotive industry. Now, the second shift, some people say it might be GM and Sloan. That's legitimate, but I think the second shift is really World War II. And what was significant about this shift, and you're starting to see this a lot in the press, is this industry, challenged by FDR, completely switched from making millions of cars, literally in months, to hundreds and thousands of planes and tanks and guns, the stuff that won the war. It was done at a speed and an urgency and success we've never seen. This grew the industry to its post-war success, probably the peak of the industry in the 50s and 60s, until the third shift came. And that third shift, as we all know, oil shocks. I was even born during the first oil shock of the Arab embargo in 73, 74, to the second oil shock in 79 with the Iranian hostage crisis. Obviously, global hypercompetition coming in, a shift to smaller vehicles, to a little bit of a peak in the 90s when we were able to, when oil price collapsed again, a lot of it because we saved a lot of oil in the late 70s and early 80s, to this latest one, which is Regeneration. And I think it really launched in 2003, 2004, peaking last year when oil hit $147 a barrel On the drive here, I saw $1.99 gas. I never thought I'd see that, but, and we saw this with the launching of the Prius, the Tesla EV startup, forthcoming the GM Volt, new business models as well, like Better Place, Zipcar, a lot of innovation. And what we're seeing is this fourth shift, this fourth transformational shift, is where we are headed, as Keith said, over the next 15 to 20 years. So let me talk about what I see are 4 drivers in this shift. The first is, as the opening introduction from Ernst & Young said, is oil and carbon are primary. And what that means is we are in a tough recession. This is really challenging times. But the recession, I promise you, is temporary. Even if you listen to CNBC, it's temporary. Oil and carbon are longer lasting issues. And of course, oil is critical because it has profound implications on security. The people that have most of the oil don't like us. We import 2/3 of it. There's climate issues, of course, with this, and there's extreme volatility, which ultimately hurts the business case for everything we're going to talk about today. And as well, for carbon, now that we have a new administration, I can tell you, and if you're reading the papers, it is not if we have carbon regulation in the US, it is when. It's going to happen probably over the next couple years, but we have some details to figure out. And then I guess, of course, you can talk to Ernst & Young, who can help you figure out that details. Like who's going to get the offset? Is it upstream, downstream, consumers, dealers, manufacturers? A lot of details, but it is going to be a reality. So going to the next shift, we talk a lot about electrification. I see 2 partially electric vehicles to my left and right. But I want to go first to the core of how to make a vehicle green, and it is lightweighting, aerodynamics, and integration. I'm not the first person to say this. Actually, if you listen to Henry Ford, he said excess weight kills any self-propelled vehicle. Weight may be desirable in a steamroller, but nowhere else. Wherever anyone suggests to me that I might increase weight or add a part, I look into decreasing weight and eliminating a part. Well, in the era of cheap oil, how did we do? We didn't do that well. We actually increased our weight about 20% since 1986. That actually probably matches my weight gain since 1986. But that said, people say, well, it's because people went to bigger vehicles. Well, no, actually, if you look at the data, only 1/3 of our weight gain is due to bigger vehicles. 2/3 is because of density. Our vehicles are just heavier per unit size. And that's because we cram a lot more stuff in there. We're dealing with stricter safety regulations. And the reality is we have to take this compounding cycle of mass increase and get it to a decompounding cycle of light weighting. Why is this important? Well, if you look at that green bar, that's the conventional wisdom on what light weighting gives you. That's if you lighten a car a certain percent, it gives you that percent in fuel efficiency. So the conventional wisdom, it's about 5% for a conventional vehicle and maybe even like 3% for an electric. Well, if you look at the synergies of powertrain resizing, simply a lighter car requires a smaller engine or fewer batteries to go the same range. That efficiency basically doubles. And the aerodynamics is also a critical driver for this. So if you don't take anything else away today from my presentation, always start with the platform. A really interesting vehicle there, and again, we don't endorse any particular technologies or companies, but has anybody seen this concept car from Toyota? It's the 1/X. A lot of people haven't. It actually has 1/3 the mass of the Prius, under 1,000 pounds, and it doubles in fuel economy, and the battery packs also for its range, about half the normal size. And again, this is not a today vehicle, this is a tomorrow vehicle, but Toyota does have a pretty good track record of taking a lot of its concepts into production. And importantly, this again embodies the platform physics principle. So the third shift, and I think you're going to be hearing a lot about this in the first panel, it's this shift in the industry from mechanicals to electrification, particularly in our powertrains. And for full disclosure, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I have a lot to lose in this shift, but it's happening. And so, again, as we see, the new era in green is going to be electric vehicles. It's not going to be necessarily full battery electrics. It can be plug-ins. It can be mild hybrids, full hybrids, but it's not a new technology. I found out when I talked to my grandfather, who's 96 years old, that his mother actually had an electric vehicle, a Detroit Electric. This isn't her actual vehicle, but the point is, this is actually a technology that was killed by the first shift. This is one that got killed by the Model T. But at one point in time, electric vehicles had significant US market share. Now, the market was tiny, but this is not a new technology. Today's space is getting very crowded. This is just an illustrative example of some vehicles that are on the market or coming to the market, and it's all over the map. Again, conventional hybrids, plug-in hybrids, electric vehicles. You're a sophisticated audience. I assume I don't have to explain the differences in that, as well as vehicles that are retrofitted, basically converting current vehicles, modified platforms to new platforms. It's a very hot space. And what's important to know is this hot space isn't just about shifting from gasoline to electrons or shifting from internal combustion engines and mechanical drive systems to electric motors and batteries. It's a new engineering design space. Take the Tesla. Some of you guys might know the story. They originally had very tight specs. They had to go 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds and a top speed, I think, of 120 miles an hour, which is very hard for an electric motor. So they went with a 2-speed. Well, they couldn't meet the requirements. These things kept decomposing after a few thousand miles. They kept going and going and going, and what they finally decided was, you know what, we're not going to make this a mechanical problem, we're going to make this an electronic software and integration problem. So what they did is they went and through integrating motors, power electronics, and software, were able to come up with a single speed solution that met their specs but had other benefits. A third more torque, no gearbox or clutch, 18 pounds of mass savings, 10 miles longer range, and cheaper. And that's where the business model is going to win. We can't just assume that this stuff's always going to be more expensive. We have to use innovation to take the unique capabilities of these technologies to drive out cost. And it's going to be very different than the ways we drive out cost today. But there are ways to do it. This is just the first example. The fourth driver of the fourth shift, I think, is, to me, the most exciting. And this is the increasing convergence of vehicles, buildings, and the grid. When we have all these, and I'm confident GM is going to sell as many Volts as they can make. It's going to be a great car. But when we sell all these Volts, plug-in Priuses, other Nissan electric vehicles, Ford when they come out with electric vehicles, is this going to create a collision with utilities because you're bringing all these vehicles onto a system that right now only serves mainly buildings and industry? Well, the reality is, no. It's not going to be a big deal for utilities. In fact, GM and EPRI have a big collaboration to help figure this out. Because to a utility, in the short term, a plug-in hybrid like the Volt, that might be drawing about a kilowatt and a half, because you can plug it into your 120-volt outlet, it's going to basically look like a couple fridges or a plasma TV or an air conditioner. I mean, in fact, when air conditioning came on the market, the utilities didn't freak out and say, can we handle this load? They did. And so most utilities say, this doesn't scare us, particularly if we can incentivize consumers to charge at night. And during the EV1 era, utilities like PG&E offered tiered pricing for much cheaper electricity at night, and it turned out 85% of drivers obeyed it. They didn't have the fancy technologies then, so they actually used Christmas light timers to charge their vehicles. But it's not whether the grid is ready. It's going to be ready. It's, are we ready for the transformative effect of taking your guys' product, which has been really isolated as an energy system, and combine them with the other two huge energy systems in our society, buildings and the grid. And there's a lot to talk about here. You can download our report on this at move.rmi.org/smartgarage. But the implications are profound, and this is how your cars are going to drive value outside your sector. For example, plugging your cars in the grid, and not with fancy bidirectional charge, but with smart charging, can help make wind and solar, but in particular wind, more affordable, up to 11%. As well, net zero buildings, as they call them in California, or energy positive buildings, people putting PVs on their roofs. There's going to be really interesting building vehicle interactions, and companies like Johnson Controls are really excited about this. So there is tremendous opportunity in what we call the smart garage, and not literally because it's going to happen in your garage, but the garage is where your car meets the grid in your house. This interesting thing I talked about, how can plug-in hybrids or EVs help, for example, wind? Well, it's not just what you might hear about this concept of V2G, vehicle to grid, or bidirectional flow. You can do things like smart charge it. So this is actually a very labor-intensive way to do smart charging. But the idea is when the wind is blowing, you can coordinate with your vehicles to make sure they're charging only when the wind is blowing. And because, for example, a Volt that might have 8 kilowatt hours of usable battery range, they could probably charge that in 6 hours. It might be plugged into your house over a whole night, 14 hours. It doesn't have to just charge and then stop. It can charge intermittently, again, in synergy with things like wind, which blows mostly at night. And in the long term, that 15 to 20 years when we get bidirectional power, the next time gas is at $4 a gallon, we're not going to be cursing. The gas pump might be paying us. Because if we plug in our car in the middle of the day, at peak times like in California when electricity can get up to $4 a kilowatt hour, your car and your car's battery might be the peak energy that's needed at that time. So let me shift quickly into 4 myths as we enter this new era. The first one, the Hummer is greener than the Prius. Who's read that or heard that or saw this story? It was a plot on Boston Legal. Well, let me bust this myth, and we could have a whole talk on it. But basically, the bottom line is, from a life cycle perspective, 80% or more of a car's environmental impact is tied to its efficiency. That's all you have to know. If you want to really do the data, the Argonne Labs has this model called GREET. It's a public source model to do life cycle analysis. But essentially, across car platforms, 80% efficiency. 80% of its impact is its use phase. The second myth is it's all about the battery. If we could just get batteries cheaper, safer, lower, make sure they're durable, then we've solved these problems. And what I want to say is, yes, those are all important. We need to do all those things. The battery is a critical enabling technology of this future. However, it's also important to note that they only have an energy density of 1 to 2% of gasoline, even the most advanced batteries. Gasoline's pretty amazing stuff in terms of how much energy it can hold. So for EVs to work, we have to focus on other enabling technologies as well, such as the platform physics I talked about, lightweighting and aerodynamics, as well as making sure we have an infrastructure that offers convenient charging for the consumer. Myth number 3, and you hear this a lot, check all the above. In the near term, we have to tackle everything. Well, it sort of offends, I'm an MBA, and it offends the economist in me, because we all know market economics is about making tough choices with scarce resources. We have to make some tough choices. I'll leave it for you to decide which choices they are that you want to make. My personal perspective is we need to focus on lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, that architecture's all the enabling technologies in there, new lightweight materials bringing aluminum and carbon fiber into the industry, second-generation biofuels, and algal fuels. Now, that seems like a lot, but we have a lot of other things that we're currently exploring, and it's time to focus resources. Finally, myth number 4, and this might be one of the elephants in the room, which is we can make money selling electric typewriters. And what I mean by that is, can we take existing cars, the way we make them and sell them today, rip out a bill of materials powertrain that might be $3,000 or $4,000, replace it with maybe a $20,000 powertrain or more if it's a full electric vehicle, and expect the consumer to pay for it when there's so much oil volatility out there, and they have to internalize the fuel savings. Consumers will pay more. I mean, there's a lot of studies on an electric vehicle because there's a lot of unique cool features. Like, for example, you can overnight make sure it's warm or cool right when you get in there. It's got great low-end torque, but it's not enough to make the incredible cost premiums we're going to see now and even over the next 10 years. So we have to think about new models to monetize these technologies. So like the Tesla example, we got to be innovative in how we lower cost. We have to be just as innovative of growing that top line. Easy to say, can you do it? Well, let's look outside the auto industry. Let's look at other industries that have faced similar transformational shifts and see how they did it. So let's look at Boeing. You guys probably know this example. Now, by the way, every one of these companies is struggling in this economy. So this is all a relative success story. But Boeing, and I worked at Boeing at the time in 2003, decided to retool their whole core product line around a totally new material. It's as revolutionary as Detroit said, we're not going to start making steel cars, we're going to make aluminum. Boeing said, we're going to start making our planes out of carbon fiber composites. And it really flipped the industry. This has the fastest order book in history. It revived Boeing's commercial aviation business. It put Airbus really on the defensive. And this has had some very well publicized production delays. But this is a real game-changing plane. And it really is core in helping Boeing really basically succeed for the next 40 to 50 years in one of its core businesses. Model 2, Apple. It's an easy story to look at. You know, Apple's very successful. I'm actually presenting this on an Apple. I wish I had Apple stock. But the reality is they had if you remember from the 90s, I mean, Apple was basically dead. Wired had a cover magazine of Apple with barbed wire around it saying, RIP Apple. Well, they changed because they said, we're going to flip our model from selling PCs bundled with proprietary software to going with game-changing products that have recurring revenue streams. Apple was selling products, they weren't getting a lot of recurring streams. For those of us who have iPhones, iPods, and iTunes, Apple is really getting significant revenue on the ecosystem they've created around their products. Number 3 is IBM. I mean, IBM's reinvented themselves multiple times. They were the typewriter manufacturer, electric typewriter manufacturer, mainframes, and they were the leaders in laptops. I used to have a ThinkPad. Now they're services. They've managed to flip themselves multiple times to deal with the transformational change and difficult environment in their industry. And again, all these companies have outperformed their competitors. The last slide showed how Apple was way outperforming. So the idea is, in a transformation, if you can shift, there is tremendous opportunity. And maybe we haven't seen that yet in the auto industry, but we've seen that with big, multi-billion-dollar US-based corporations that had their own strong culture and own strong legacy and were able to reinvent themselves. Where is the value going in automotive? Again, there's always going to be the need to sell and deliver high-quality products that customers love. And Detroit does that better than anybody. But where the value might be shifting is a little bit away of this sell a product, sell another product, dump it to your dealer chain for them to sell it, to recurring revenue streams. For anybody familiar with Zipcar and Better Place? Those are two relatively new companies that are basically trying to reinvent the automotive business model. Zipcar, basically rent by the hour. Better Place, people think here especially it's all about battery swapping. No, Better Place is about flipping the model from selling products to basically being a cell phone provider. And in Israel and Denmark and Australia and possibly in the future in the US, you go to your dealer and you don't buy a car, you buy a service plan based on how many miles you want to drive. And Shai Agassi, their CEO, is claiming right now the economics work for certain high mileage drivers that you get that car for free. Now, again, I haven't evaluated that, but that's the kind of compelling thinking we need, taking that risk and upfront cost from the consumer and figuring out ways to monetize and profit from it. Let me go finally to some RMI initiatives. What are we doing about this fourth shift? I mean, we've worked in this industry since Amory Lovins published first on this in 1991, but we're doing some pretty cool things. One is we're working with the Brookings Institute on this oil problem. I'll be honest with you, if gas stays at $1.99 a gallon and we don't do something about it from a policy and societal perspective, this is going to be a tough row. We're going to be able to lower costs, we're going to be able to bring value, but in cheap oil, it's going to really make our environment very, very difficult. We got to fix the oil problem. And so we're working with the Brookings Institution in Washington, bringing together a lot of players to really tackle this, because there's a lot of oil plans out there, the Pickens plan, the Gore plan, the Grove plan. We're bringing them together to try to create a unified, coherent framework to then ultimately market to the country. We're also working as part of this Smart Garage project. A lot of you were there, or your companies were there when we convened in Portland last month. And we're doing we barrier busted getting that EV infrastructure started, and one of the biggest barriers identified was this chicken and egg problem. Can we create the market environment to sell a lot of these Volts, these plug-in Priuses? And we found that one of the big things we need to do is work with US cities to facilitate their adoption through making sure the incentives and infrastructure is there. You can, again, download the report on this at our Smart Garage page. As well, we're looking to other markets. We could be very green in the US. You know, we consume about a quarter of the world's oil, about 20 million barrels a day. It's important to know that this saying of India and China, you know, that they could be future consumers, it's really shocking how true this can be when you realize their per capita car ownership is less than ours during the first shift. So a lot of new cars are going to come on the market there. We're working there to look at some innovative solutions to provide the benefits of personal mobility without all the environmental impact. And finally, you know, Rocky Mountain Institute, we are a research and consulting institution, so we do work with clients, we work with foundations and donors. When we actually get our hands dirty, as opposed to having this base in Colorado, we spin things out. So we spun out Hypercar. One of our most exciting spin out is Bright Automotive. With a lot of work we were doing with Alcoa and Johnson Controls and Google to look at next generation plug-in hybrid technologies around these fourth shift trends, including lightweighting and integration. Well, this company is now in Indianapolis. It's led by John Waters. There's a gentleman here today from Bright Automotive that can tell you about what they're doing, but it's basically applying these principles in a for-profit model. I want to close by saying, again, talking about the taboo topic of the bailout, that we need it today. We need this money. I mean, we can't have this industry go bankrupt. We all know the implications. Consumers will lose trust. They may not be able to sell cars. It's a downward spiral. We need to do some short-term help. But money is not going to solve our problems, particularly in green. We can't just dump money in and expect this revolution to start. We have to have bold action. We've got to change the way we've been doing things. And what this means is to get to this fourth shift of regeneration, we've got to take the innovation of Henry Ford and how dramatic it was when he consolidated all those thousands of boutique manufacturers into mass production. Ultimately, he had his own Moore's Law. That Model T was decreasing in price every year. He figured this out. We have to have that innovation with the purpose of the second shift. This city, this industry, shifted from making millions of cars to hundreds of thousands of planes in a few years. We can make this shift happen if we have the sense of urgency. And if right now, with all our security problems, our global problems, climate problems, and financial problems aren't enough for urgency, I don't know what is. We are the people we've been waiting for. We in this room are the ones that are going to drive this shift. So I urge you throughout today as we engage and we talk and we learn that we go out tomorrow on our jobs and we start making this happen. And of course, if you want to talk to us more or learn more about what we're doing, you can contact us at move@rmi.org. We're happy to help. So thank you very much.
Very good, Michael. I do find it a little bit irritating that I remember the first oil crisis very well, and you weren't even born.
I was born 1 year before. So.
Whole bunch of questions, so we'll keep them real quick and all that. Are you worried about China and India as they grow in population of ignoring green?
I'm not worried about them ignoring green, but if you look at the actual fundamental numbers of resource consumption, I've seen numbers that they have to be 8 to 20-fold more efficient with the same level of service that we enjoy to actually not exacerbate some of the environmental problems we're having. So I'm worried, not that they don't care about green, but they're not on a trajectory nearly as fast enough. And same with the US. So it's more about the trajectory than intent.
There are a lot of industries that use fuel. The world seems to be centering in on the automobile as the one industry that should change. Do you think society is going to get around to prioritizing things like airplanes, railroads, steamships, all of which are huge users. I mean, I haven't heard anybody talking about alternate fuels for jet planes.
It's a fantastic question, and the reality is 70%, and it's really an oil issue, not an energy issue. 70% of oil is used in transport. About half of that, maybe a little bit more, is cars and light trucks. So these visions that you say, if we electrify the whole car and truck industry, we can get off oil. It only cuts at oil if in this utopian scenario, 30 to 40%, right, which is only half our imports. So this is absolutely a critical point. We got to look at heavy trucks. We've got to look at shipping. We've got to look at industrial uses of oil. And we have to look at even, strange sectors like the military. And RMI is engaging in all of those.
Who's going to win? I think most people would agree that the electric car is going to win in 40 years. Well, what's going to power, where's the electricity going to come from? Get your crystal ball out. Give me a real little.
Probably a map there,
Just roll the dice and tell me, is it batteries? Is it fuel cells? Where are we going to get the power for those electric cars?
I think what's interesting is in powering vehicles, it is going to ultimately migrate towards electricity. There have been interesting studies that shown even if we power them mostly with our current grid, which is half coal, the CO2 emissions are still lower because electric propulsion is more efficient than gasoline ICE propulsion. In the longer term, in 40 to 50 years, RMI sees an increasingly renewables-based grid, wind, solar, geothermal, powering plug-in hybrids and full EVs. I personally don't think full EVs are going to meet the needs of all consumers, even in the longer term, again, because of the fundamental properties of batteries. I think plug-in hybrids are an excellent near and even longer term solution with EVs playing a role in certain applications.
Worry that utilities are going to raise their rates as we become more and more dependent on what are now monopolies throughout the country?
Well, utilities are, by the way,
we'll be in the same mess with a different group of players.
Couple things. It's a very interesting question. Utilities might be an industry that's even more complicated and the regulations are more Byzantine than the automotive industry. There's 50 separate regulatory regimes. Each state has its own PUC. But the bottom line is, and so they're highly regulated, even how they can raise rates. The bottom line is per mile, the cost to drive an EV or plug-in hybrid, depending on your electricity, even at rates at 10 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour, is maybe 2 to 3 to 4 cents a mile. Gasoline at $4 a gallon is like 17 cents. At $2 a gallon, it's 9 cents. So even at $2 a gallon gas and very expensive electricity, per mile, electricity is cheaper. So we'd have to raise electricity rates through the roof, which isn't going to happen because these are highly regulated.
Double?
To break even on a pure basis today, it would have to be triple or quadruple. And at $4 oil, it would have to be eightfold.
You think green, what's it going to do for the competitiveness of the Detroit 3?
I think.
Help or hinder?
What is green going to do?
Yeah.
I think green, again, I think if we can make this shift, I think America can lead. We're going to hear from our panelists. In the room, a lot of the technologies we're talking about, advanced lithium-ion batteries, like from A123, or, advanced materials, or advanced powertrains and transmissions. A lot of this is American-born technology. I think if we set our minds to it and set our focus to it, America can be the leader. And by the way, we have the biggest oil problem in terms of amount and security. We have the most to gain by leading.
To help green vehicles sell, how expensive does gasoline have to be? Back to $4?
It's a great question. It depends on your assumptions of how efficient.
I know you've got a model somewhere out in Colorado that
we have
tells you the answer.
I will say one thing. It's not going to be profitable at current gas
taxed
prices. At $2 a gallon, that's going to be a very difficult sell. So we have
Society have to tax gasoline?
I think taxing is one issue, or you could do, like, for example, a price floor on a barrel of oil. So it's not that there's a fixed tax. It's just, let's say we set a price floor at $80 or $90 a barrel, and we tax only when the price, gets to that level, under that level, and if it's over that level, there's no tax. And it would be nice if we had told the American people when gas was the price was $150 a barrel, and people were saying it might go to $200. If we said we want to do a price floor at $90 a barrel, people would be like, ha ha ha, that's funny, no problem. Right now, it's tougher in this economy to do it at $60 a barrel. So over time, though, this could be a big priority.
50 words on nuclear power. You haven't mentioned it. Where does it fit?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Need a lot of nuclear power plants?
Oh, absolutely not. Nuclear power, again, I think it's going to play a role in a carbon-constrained world, but it's very expensive. If you look at, for example, McKinsey, that's done a lot of analyses on ways to mitigate carbon, efficiency in buildings is by far a much more affordable way to provide basically electricity.
Most forecasts have internal combustion engines remaining in over 75% of the vehicle fleet for the next 20 years. Is anybody going to beat the internal combustion engine short term?
As I said, I think gasoline, I mean, it's got its issues, but I think it's an incredible energy carrier, or energy, it is a very concentrated form of energy. That's why I like the plug-in hybrid so much, because it's, providing the benefits that we get from internal combustion and gasoline and synergizing them with electric drive. So I think for 20 years, of course, the internal combustion is going to be around.
Boone Pickens is a great fan of natural gas. Where do you weigh in on that?
I think we're much better off electrifying, lightweighting, and making our vehicle fleet more efficient, and using that natural gas to power a much leaner, more efficient electricity supply. So I think natural gas has niche applications in vehicles, maybe in heavy trucks, but even there's a lot you can do on the platform. So I would actually stick on the trajectory we're at, which is gasoline and electrification.
Is it going to be part of the mix? I see 20 years out, we're going to have everything. Everything. Is natural gas going to be part of that?
See, I disagree. I mean, I think we'd be better off not single sourcing like we do today.
We're talking about the real world.
The real world?
Yeah.
Again,
there's going to be diesel, there's gasoline, there's electricity. Will natural gas be in that mix?
I think for niche applications, but not mainstream vehicles. Natural gas is going to suffer a lot of the same infrastructure challenges that hydrogen does.
How is this all going to affect automotive suppliers? It's going to create a whole new group of suppliers that we've never heard of before, companies that we've never heard of?
I think it's going to be both. I mean, at RMI, we work with conventional suppliers, new suppliers, and it's exciting to see the dynamism and innovation in quote-unquote existing and conventional suppliers. For Delphi, we just visited their battery plant in Kokomo, Indiana. And I mean, the one thing about our conventional quote-unquote supply base is they know this market. They know low cost, they know scale, and that's a critical part of this. So I think the supply base is going to depend in the future on the supply base of today, but making different things, engineering them different ways, and again, with slightly different business models.
A couple of final questions. Tesla is now being called the Tucker of the 21st century. Do you attribute their current sad state of affairs to bad product or bad marketing?
It's a loaded question.
Did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I don't think Tesla is the Tucker of the 21st century. I think they've just started. They're going to, got to aim to be cash flow positive in 6 months. I mean, they've got teething pains because they're the first real automotive startup in the U.S. since Chrysler. So, but if you look at the capabilities that they have at their core product of battery packs and drive system integration and drive system design, I think they're going to have a great future, maybe as a supplier as well as providing niche vehicles. So I think I would not write Tesla off.
Tesla will be glad to hear that. One final question. How important is government subsidies, mandates, involvement to the marketplace to move it away from the internal combustion platform?
Another fantastic question. We're hearing about a car czar. I really hope the government doesn't get in the business of managing and commercializing innovation or picking winners and losers. They tried that. It was called PNGV. It was a $1 billion failure in the 90s. The government, what they need to do is tackle the fundamentals. Just like in the housing crisis, they've got to tackle the fundamentals of people overextending themselves, too much borrowing, bad debt. In the automotive industry, what the government needs to do is figure out the oil issue and get a real price of oil that, again, with things like an oil price floor. Number two, they also need to help at the consumer level. So what are things they can do there? They need to help develop and build this EV infrastructure. And that's not just on the federal level, that's in the local and state level. There's a lot of potential benefits of that. And number three is we have to think about innovative ways to take risk out. Again, not choosing winners or losers, but so, for example, with batteries, can the government get involved in doing something to say, help deal with the potential risk and liability of the batteries? Maybe help pay for the batteries, help facilitate secondary markets. So I think those would be the biggest policy agendas I'd see for the government. They really can't, I would not advise, again, having worked for a military contractor as well, that we're not going to see this shift if the government actually micromanages or gets too involved in developing and engineering this, but they have to set the rules to make this work.
I assume from your answer that means you're not a candidate for the czar job.
I'm not, but I do have my resume if Barack wants to give me a call.
Michael, thank you very much. Terrific presentation.